most amazing folks, I'm Alexa, the resident emo girl, and I'm glad to be bopping back over for another installment. Granted, I'm not as thrilled to be talking about icky people, but I'm just happy to be on y'all's screens once again. Question for you folks, so we can, get to know each other. Who do you consider the most evil person in history? I'm not quite sure who my number one would be, so let me know your take in the comments, help me make up my mind, and welcome to the top 10 evil prisoners you never want to encounter. Number 10, Paul Bernardo. He is a Canadian serial killer and more, who was dubbed the schoolgirl. Other monikers I can't say, thanks to the interwebs hating the R word, and together with his former wife, Karla Homolka, one half of the Ken and Barbie. Beneath his charming facade, he developed pyromaniac inclinations and dark sexual fantasies in his youth, one of which involved creating a virgin farm where he would breed virgin girls to take advantage of. Later in life, Paul was diagnosed with sadism, voyeurism, narcissistic personality disorder, and met the requirements for a diagnosis of psychopathy. So that checks. Between 1987 and 1990, Bernardo committed increasingly vicious serial crimes in and around Scarborough, attacking most of his victims after stalking them as they got off buses late in the evening. During this time frame, he met and got engaged to Karla Homolka, and that's when things escalated from crimes to, well, there are three notable. I'm just going to talk about the one that disturbs me the most for time purposes. Although he was engaged to Karla, Paul had become obsessed with her younger sister Tammy, peering into her window and entering her room to get himself off while she slept. 6 months before their 1991 wedding, Karla stole sleeping pills from the clinic she was working at, and on December 23rd of 1990, Karla and Paul administered said pills to Tammy in a rum and eggnog cocktail. When Tammy lost consciousness, Karla and Bernardo undressed her, and Karla applied a halothane-soaked cloth to her sister's nose and mouth. Karla wanted to give Tammy's virginity to Paul for Christmas, since according to her, he was disappointed that he wasn't Karla's first sexual partner, and the duo also had a video camera on hand for the experience. You can't make stuff like this up. Tammy began to vomit, and they tried to revive her and called 911 after hiding evidence, dressing Tammy and moving her into the bedroom, but Tammy never woke up, despite being observed vacuuming and washing laundry in the middle of the night, and with the evidence of a chemical burn on Tammy's face, the regional municipality of Niagara coroner and Karla's family accepted the couple's version of events, that she had just choked on her own after consumption of, bad things. After Tammy's death, Paul and Karla videotaped themselves engaging in sexual intercourse, with Karla wearing Tammy's clothing and pretending to be her. Thankfully, nowadays, Paul is in jail for the rest of his life, but Karla's out in public, living alone in Salaberry de Valleyfield. Number 9 is Issei Sagawa. He is an infamous Japanese serial killer who was convicted in the 1980s for the killing and consumption of a fellow student. For reference, he was born into a wealthy family in Tokyo and studied at the prestigious Sorbonne University in Paris. In 1981, classmate Renee Hartevelt and was arrested the following day after police found evidence of people munching in the apartment, including traces of human remains in the refrigerator. Sagawa was charged with committing a and sent to a mental hospital for evaluation, where he was eventually diagnosed with a mental illness that caused him to act impulsively and without regard for others. He was eventually released from prison after serving just 2 years due to his mental illness, although he remains under constant supervision and has to check in regularly with his doctor. Despite this, he has become something of a celebrity in Japan and has published a book detailing his experience of the crime, his trial, and his time in prison. Technically, I know I'm cheating a little since he isn't in jail anymore, but with his condition and his past, I definitely won't want to run into him in public. Number 8, Eric Rudolph. So Eric Rudolph is an American extremist who was responsible for a series of explosives in the United States between 1996 to 1998. After dropping out of school in the 8th grade, he joined the United States Army and served as a paratrooper from 1986 to 1989. In the early 1990s, Rudolph became a militant anti-abortion activist and began constructing homemade explosives using instructions from the Anarchist Cookbook. In 1996, Rudolph targeted 2 abortion clinics in Birmingham, Alabama, and a gay nightclub in Atlanta, Georgia. He then attacked Centennial Olympic Park during the 1996 Summer Olympics, one person and injuring more than 100 others. All in all, Rudolph is believed to be responsible for 4 explosive events, resulting in the deaths of 2 people and injuries to more than 150 others. Following a massive FBI investigation, he was finally apprehended in 2003 after hiding out in the Appalachian Mountains for more than 5 years. In 2005, he pleaded guilty to the crimes and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He's currently serving his sentence at ADX Florence, a federal prison in Colorado. Number 7, Glenn Stark Chambers. Before his time in prison, 23-year-old Glenn was living with his 22-year-old girlfriend, waitress Connie Weeks, in Sarasota, Florida. The relationship seems to have not been ideal. Back in January of 1975, a policeman intervened to prevent Glenn from physically attacking Connie on the street during an argument when he already had her hair in his fist. The policeman, who was off duty at the time, arrested Glenn on the spot and called for backup to bring him to jail, but Connie bailed him out later that day. That same night, Glenn showed up at the Sarasota Memorial Hospital, carrying Connie in his his arms, claiming she'd slipped in the shower. It was a stupid lie, and the doctors and nurses who tended to Connie phoned the police. She passed away in the hospital later that week, and a judge sentenced Glenn to the electric chair. Now, the young man attempted to escape almost immediately upon arriving in prison, attacking a guard with 2 accomplices and managing to climb out a window. Now, the first attempt didn't get very far, with all 3 men being caught, and a Florida judge added 5 years to Glenn's life term. By 1990, Glenn seemed to be turning over a new leaf, with his behavior over those 15 years being described as exemplary, and prison authorities gave him permission to work in a furniture construction shop, designed to give, inmates vocational training and a sense of purpose. On February 21st of 1990, he slipped into one of those boxes of furniture that was set to be shipped off the premises to a warehouse. No one noticed the extra weights as they loaded the crate onto the truck, nor did they notice, during the entire drive to Daytona Beach, anything shifting around in the back of the truck. Like no footsteps, no clunking lids, no sound of the back panel sliding open or dropping shut, nothing. Upon arrival, however, one open crate contained a discarded prisoner's uniform, and the Correctional Institute was, missing a man. No one has yet to hear from him again, and he has been allegedly spotted in Florida and Alabama, but not officially found. Number 6, Damien Foulkes. He is an infamous prisoner who was convicted in 2002 of 2 women in England, and thankfully was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Now, Damien originally had a long criminal history and was known as a cold and calculating individual. To go into detail, he was found guilty of impaling one woman in her chest while she was sleeping, and then strangling the other with a ligature, before leaving their bodies in a disused pub. Damien was diagnosed with several mental illnesses, including schizophrenia, had an IQ of just 64, but was deemed to be sane enough to stand trial. During the trial, he admitted to 2 women, but claimed he did so in a fit of rage after being provoked. In 2013, Damien was also convicted of attempting to kill a prison guard by throwing boiling water over him. He's serving his sentence at HMP Wakefield, one of Britain's most secure prisons. There, he's been described as a cold-blooded and callous and is considered to be one of the most dangerous prisoners in the country. Number 5, Chris Watts. Chris Watts is a notorious criminal from Colorado who killed a pregnant wife and 2 daughters. In August of 2018, he pleaded guilty to 9 counts of unlawful termination of a pregnancy and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He'd been having an affair with a coworker before the and stated in interviews that he wanted to leave his family for her. On August 13th of 2018, Chris killed his pregnant wife and 2 daughters by asphyxiating them to death in their own home. After killing his family, he disposed of their bodies in oil tanks on the grounds of the property where he worked. The case gained worldwide attention and prompted investigations into the family's background and past. Chris received 5 life sentences in November of 2018 and is currently serving his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Now, he's one of the most infamous criminals in recent history, and quite the example of how seemingly normal people can commit heinous crimes. Number 4, John Childs. John Childs, also known as Bruce Childs, is a British hitman and serial killer from East London who was convicted in 1979 for a series of apparent contract and none of the bodies have been found to this day. He confessed to having committed the crimes to Detective Chief Superintendent Frank Cater in June of 1979 after he was arrested in September of 1978 for a series of bank and security van robberies in Hertfordshire. The investigation was based at Waltham Abbey Police Station in Essex, where John was convicted of carrying out the deaths of Terence Terry Eve, Robert Brown, George Brett, Terry Brett, Frederick Freddie Sherwood, and Ronald Andrews from November of 1974 to October of 1978. Also, the weapons for these haven't been found yet, which is just as scary when you think about the skill level for hiding all of that. Number 3, Robert Maudsley. Robert John Maudsley is an English man convicted of multiple. He killed 4 people, with one of the taking place in a psychiatric hospital and 2 in prison after receiving a life sentence for previous. As a teenager during the late 1960s, Robert sought out psychiatric help after several life-ending attempts, and it was during his talk with doctors that he claimed to hear voices telling him to kill parents. In 1974, Robert garroted John Farrell in Wood Green, London, and soon after surrendered himself to police, saying he needed psychiatric help. He was found unfit to stand trial and instead was sent to Broadmoor Hospital. In 1977, he and another patient, David Cheeseman, who at the time was serving a sentence for sexual crimes, locked themselves in a cell with a 3rd patient named David Francis, who committed crimes I can't even say on here. The duo punished David Francis to death over a period of 9 hours, and after this incident, Maudsley was convicted of manslaughter and sent to Wakefield Prison. In 1978, he killed 2 fellow prisoners at Wakefield in one day, even though he had originally set out to kill 7. You know, underachieving. So yeah, if you value your life, maybe transfer out of that jail if you're there. Number 2, Arthur Hutchinson. So Arthur is a convicted triple. Born in Hartlepool, County Durham, he attained notoriety in 1984 when he was convicted of the committed in Dore, Sheffield, South Yorkshire on the 23rd of October in 1983. He remains in prison and since 2008 has made a number of legal challenges to try and overturn his life sentence. Now, he had already spent more than 5 years in prison for the attempted killing of his half-brother, Dino, before that fateful day in 1983 when he arrived at Selby Police Station after being arrested on suspicion of theft, burglary, and sexual harm. He has to go to the washroom, and while he was there, jumped out of a window in an attempt to escape and cut his knee on barbed wire. After 3.5 weeks on the run, Hutchinson broke into the home of Basil Leitner, his wife, and their son via, a patio window and impaled all 3 of them to death. After spending another 2 weeks on the run, wearing disguises and moving from place to place in Barnsley and many other places that I cannot pronounce, he was finally caught on a farm in Hartlepool on November 5th of 1983. During his trial on September 11th of 1984, he accused Mike Barron, then a reporter with the Sunday Mirror, of committing said crimes. Hutchinson was found guilty of all accusations though on September 14th after a 4-hour deliberation and sentenced to life in prison. Number 1. Luca Magnotta. So for some context, Jun Lin, also known as Justin, arrived in Canada back in 2010 with the intention of starting a new life and, to study computer engineering and settle down in Quebec. He was living with a man for a period of time as an openly gay man here in Canada, but sadly wasn't out to his parents, who were pressuring him to settle down and marry a woman, and tension from this caused him to break up with his boyfriend. I promise, it's relevant. After breaking up with his boyfriend, Lin had been using Grindr and other web applications to meet with men, and through a Craigslist ad, he met Luca Magnotta, and sadly, that's where this tale goes sour. Lin was last seen on May 24th of 2012 when his friends reported getting a text message from him around 9 p.m. 3 of his friends went into his apartment on May 27th after not hearing from him and reported him missing on the 29th. On May 25th, an 11-minute video titled One Lunatic, One Ice Pick was uploaded online depicting a naked male tied to a bed frame being repeatedly impaled with what was later established to be a screwdriver and a kitchen stabby implement, then dismembered, followed by acts of necrophilia. The perpetrator used that kitchen device and a fork to cut off some flesh, and police have seen a longer version of the video where acts of people munching were committed. Several hours after Lin, Magnotta booked a round-trip ticket for a flight from Montreal to Paris using a passport with his own name. Police confirmed on May 30th that the video was sadly authentic and identified Lin as the victim. On June 13th of 2012, the forelimbs and torso that had been mailed to various political parties were matched to Lin using DNA samples from his family. On July 1st, his head was recovered at the edge of a small lake in Montreal's Anguignon Park after police received an anonymous tip. Going back to June 4th though, Magnotta was finally apprehended by Berlin police at an internet cafe while reading news stories about himself after quite the manhunt. He tried giving fake names before admitting who he was, and his identity was confirmed through fingerprint evidence. He's been sentenced to life in prison, and thank goodness for that. And that brings us to the end of our time, and I suppose, if anyone needed a good reason to avoid going to jail other than the obvious, I hope today was helpful. If you enjoyed my ramblings, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more fabulous content from the folks here at Most Amazing Top 10, and hey, if you want more from me, I'll see y'all over on Top 5 Scary Videos. See you next time.